All right, everybody. I'm continuing on with this Bigfoot story out of Bigfoot Terror Tales Vol.1 called Night Stalkers. Let's continue on, shall we? Rachel London was an attractive 21-year-old. She lived most of her nights on the edgy and wild side. Most men of Rakersville knew who she was or knew the buzzing name. I'll meet you outside around the back a little later, Rachel said to another nameless face as they vanished into the darkness. She had just made arrangements with Charlie after her current meeting was waiting in a cold sweat for the time to arrive. The time seemed to crawl by at a torturous pace. Clandestine meeting was to be the following night at midnight. Until then, Rachel had other business to attend. Most of the residents of Rakersville are terminal shock and despair. Stay tuned as the story unfolds, the reporter said on the motel set at the Rakersville Inn. Rachel rolled over and pulled herself out of bed. She was in quite a post-orgasmic stagger as she made her way around the room. Her occasional friend was gone. Rachel gathered her purse, clothing, posture, and thoughts and walked outside. She left the television on behind her. She returned the key and walked off through the parking lot. She had so much swimming through her skull and her mind's eye was drained and fuzzy. She looked around as she stumbled down the street. Without a warning, she fell face first into a large snow pit. She raised her weary head and looked around. It was something much weirder than a pit, and much worse. Something moved behind her, something not human. I don't want him here sometimes, Jill said as the silent air filled the empty space in which Gregory's response would usually reply. Gregory was not there. He was in his bed, out cold and sound asleep. Jill standing in the hallway outside of Williford's bedroom. Her palms were sweaty. It was my fault. I should have done it, Jill replied to herself. A little while after, a strangely lurked a dead silence as these dark wishes whirled through her head. Something else lurked outside of her home. They were watching the family through the windows from deep within the woods which surrounded their home. 4 sets of inhuman eyes watched the Felomont family as they slept. She was lost in a scatterbrained sense of insomnia injected in delusional sleep deprivation. Jill was talking and replying to no one but herself. She was speaking upon her own dead ears. She cracked open the bedroom door and looked in on Williford as he lay still in bed. Someone she never noticed was creeping on the other side of the window. They were inching their way closer to the Felomont castle. They could smell the warm blood inside of the wooden and glass encasement. Through their starving vision, the family was a home-shaped Happy Meal. Multiple breathing began to circle the home from the shrouded night sky. Sniffs and growls in the wind began to close in on the sturdy wooden structure. The family was unaware and without a clue as to what closed in on their home on this cold and snowy night. Jill closed the door and walked into the living room. She sat and watched television. Breaking stories were continued as a commentary to the macabre string of homicides happening around the area. It seemed to reach further than Rakersville. Whoever is out there is extremely dangerous. We repeat, he is extremely dangerous and savagely vicious. Everyone is ordered to their residential domains as darkness falls. This is a mandatory request by the local law enforcement. Psycho outside. I'm not afraid of some fruity little hey-ha truck driver that landed on his cranium as the baby. Come over, Charlie mumbled in a dying slur or drool and spurting words. He could barely comprehend his own coined language of incoherent babble. A loud slam outside sprung Charlie to his feet, and a firm attention with almost a sharpened military precision. "Who's there?" Charlie screamed as Valley slept through the vocal rampage of regurgitated slithering words. "Who's that outside? I'm coming out with a bat." "No, a freaking gun." Charlie threatened with as much force as he could verbally muster up within his gut and throat. Charlie could not control his masculinity, and as his voice trembled and quivered into a crumbled block of scrabbled, cracking octaves. Whatever was out there that moved much closer to his home and within comfort zone, two huge cornelius could be seen through the fallen snow and frosted window against the nocturnal backdrop. A sinisterly squinted brow draped over the beady night prowly eyes. Rachel scanned the premise and noticed the oddly shaped dention into which he had stumbled and fallen. She felt dumbfounded in disorientation until her reflexes and instinct finally took control and commanded her to react and look behind her. She gazed up from the hole in which she was suddenly embedded. Heavily painted snarls were closing in from all around her. She could hear them howling throughout the brutally nipping breeze. The pressure and force of the flake-laced wind made Rachel's eyes water with an uncertainty of what lay 2 steps ahead or behind her. She knew someone had her surrounded. It surrounded like multiple large men hacking in the night air. The only difference was their nostril inhalation. There was something a little different about the way he or they breathed. Rachel could hear them, their chainsaw-like snorting through the heavily raging winds. Something was not right. It could have been someone from her past that she did not want any confrontation with. There were many she had been threatened before. Whoever it could have been kept getting louder and closer with every forceful, beastly, inhuman breath. The sound resembled that of a large, hungry dog or wolf that had not eaten in a week. It was too loud, too solid to be human. She knew it was Jolly, her neighbor's home protection, a boxer half her size. This sounded like 10 of them amplified into a roaring pack, a hunting pack that was out for flesh and blood. Still, it could not be the sound a human would make. No man could possibly produce such a ghastly nasal inhale. Their breathing patterns began to sound somewhat along the lines of a feasting lion chewing on a freshly severed leg or lamb or deer. Woo! No, you don't want to be around that scene. Mom, Mama, Mom, Mama. Williford screamed from his bedroom in a shriek of defending terror. "Help! It's a bad, man." Jill's firmly snapped, and initial reaction was to immediately check on her child. He had never displayed such behavior that either of his birth givers could recall. Gregory and Jill were smacked into a rude awakening in the middle of the night. They both met each other at Williford's bedroom door as he continued to wail in a screeching fit. "Someone's outside! Someone's outside!" Williford hurled in a glass-shattering tone of fearful excitement and sweat-pumping fury. "What in the world is wrong with him?" Jill shouted in a halfway aggravated hiss. I don't know. Let's go in and find out, okay? "There's bad man outside the window. Bad man window." Williford screamed as he pointed at the window in a possessed trance of emotionless fright. Half of Jill knew her son could not have been as crazy as some of her darker personalities. The obscure extremities inside of her were fighting to get free somehow. "What is that?" Gregory asked in a calm manner. "Someone's outside," Williford replied in a tantrum of torment. "There's no one out there, Will," Jill bellowed in hateful verbal gore. Jill Gregory forcefully spewed at his loving wife. Where is he, Craig? Huh? Under the bed? In the closet? Where, Gregory? There's no one out there, Craig," Jill proclaimed as she pulled the curtains closed. Gregory comforted Williford until the certainty washed over him that he had calmed down enough to settle and fall asleep. A dark human-like figure shifted and shuffled across the white cloth-tinted wooden frame behind Jill. As she met Gregory in the hallway, the silhouette had already made its way out of sight. She looked behind her one last time and closed the door. Williford was alone again. He could still hear the stirring around outside. The shuffling around in the trees were subtle, yet to Williford sounded like a set of razor-sharp rusting nails on a chain board. Oh man, I know that'd be a terrible sound to hear. He could hear Gregory and Jill talking in the hallway as their voices eventually made their separate ways. The silence crept into Williford's bedroom once again. Like a disturbed stench that would not go away, something was outside of his window. Whatever it was not his parents. He was not much of a social type, so that marked out any friends wanting to scout about in the night, especially with someone that could not make a quick getaway, much less an escape at all. Williford looked through his window and saw a large man-like hand. The nails on the fingers were too long to be human. Williford began to shake horribly and clench onto his bedspread, pulling it up over his face. His mother had planted in his head that he was seeing things. This was no hallucination. There was no scary man outside of his window. There was no serial killer. There was no human being on the other side of the cloth-draped glass. That was all that stood between Williford and the monster. Williford's mind started to battle in a bout of believing his mother that it was all in his mind, or come to reason with what he saw with his own two eyes. "No, boy, you're not losing it. That's actual Bigfoot outside your window." Charlie Richmond moved closer toward the door in a panic-ridden stumble of toxicity. He had a Louisville grip in his right hand and the other extended toward the front door. "You ain't killed nowhere near as many deer as I have, you dingbat psycho," Charlie screamed as he reached his hand toward the doorknob. He slowly turned the knob and pulled on the door. It was locked. Charlie reached down, unlocked the door, and flung it open in rage. He stepped outside and onto his front porch. He looked around and deep into the quilt of darkness that was knitted over his straining vision. He jumped off the porch and into the yard and began to walk around, keeping his head swiveling like a sprinkler. His bat was raised high above his shoulders in a combat stance. He heard heavy breathing coming from the trees, a sinisterly powerful and starving pant. "Who's back there? You don't come out and you're paid for some. Hey, who's back there?" Charlie yelled as synthetic sense of alcohol fuel bravely swept over him. "You're out here? I don't see you nowheres. I got my buddy with me. He wants to give you a little kiss," Charlie shouted as he continued to move his head around. Supple head jerks seemingly turned into nervous spasms. Before too long, the breathing was closing in from the dark woods. Charlie proceeded to make his way toward the outskirts of the wooden perimeter. He looked down to his feet and took a deep gasp. He had never seen anything like it before, a miniature crater. Charlie bent down and pulled in at a closer glance. He realized what he was standing over. It was no crater caused by a rock of any kind. This massive part missing from the earth was caused by none other than a foot. Something had left its mark and was not of the human race. Charlie knew that by all of the animals he had hunted growing up with his father, the footprint almost looked somewhat human. Only 3 times its size. A foul odor began to burn and singe Charlie's nose hairs. He glanced over at a tree stump. A few feet away and almost gagged in sickened disbelief. His glance looked into a solid stare. He had seen many animal paw prints in his days, but nothing this large. What in the... Charlie said as he glared at the most massive pile of bodily waste he had ever seen. He knew right away that no human life could produce something this enormous, let alone devour what it would take to produce what massive pile steamed before him. Holy... Charlie gagged again before he could finish the commonly used and perfect occasion fitting phrase. He looked up into the jaws and gaping pie hole of a beast like he had never laid his eyes on before. It was massive, hairy, hungry, and reached down for Charlie. He grabbed a baseball bat and hit the beast in the ribs. This feeble attempt only upset the creature. He let out a huge roar and smacked Charlie to the ground with a swift swipe of his gigantic hand-like paw. Charlie screamed in fear. As he fell, something warm slid down his leg in the freezing climate. He had too much pride to openly admit to himself what had just happened. He looked up and covered his face. "No!" was the only word Charlie could force through his swirling vocal cords as the beastly hand grabbed and pulled his limp body upward. A mouthful of razor-sharp and blood-splattered teeth began to gape wider as Charlie screamed in waste-excreting agony. His girlfriend, Valley, slept peacefully in her bed without knowledge of Charlie's gruesome dismemberment that took place in the patch of woods that overlooked their home from across the street. Oh, God. Ooh. Man, you wouldn't be able to sleep at night if you saw that happening. But anyway, that is part 2. I'm going to go ahead and skip over to part 3. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video and have a nice day.